Now, we are talking about the Lance Armstrong documentary, and I don't know, Eoin, you thought the first episode was rubbish, and the second episode was much better. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, I think it is. Like the second episode is longer, so it gives you far more scope to actually cover a few more things. I don't know, I felt that the first one was far more unintentionally funny than the second episode. So I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I don't think if something is unintentionally funny, it ever is kind of a mark of a successful documentary, really. But part two, probably less so, covered a few more serious topics. We delved into a little bit more of the character of Lance Armstrong. We know the things that he did as a doper. We sometimes don't appreciate just how much of a tyrant he was, or just how much of a bully he was. I still don't think it goes anywhere near far enough to actually expose that. And I think what we have is a parting shot of him in tears about Jan Ullrich and about the double standard that he believes exists when it comes to judging cyclists that have doped. As in, Jan Ullrich got screwed over, Lance Armstrong got screwed over, George Hincapie didn't. And according to Lance Armstrong, or certainly it's insinuated from him, that their crimes were similarly egregious and that they should be treated the same.
Yeah, look, it's such a weird scenario where you know so much about the Armstrong career from having talked about it on the show for 18 years essentially at this point, and it feels like people are going to come away from this. It's impossible not to think this guy is absolutely weird. It's a weird ability to lie to himself and to ignore all the stuff that he did and come out the other side, but also at the same time make some good points, has insane levels of charisma, and the way that the Livestrong and the Foundation are held up in this documentary over the two parts of it are like it's this unbelievable force for good in the history of American cancer patients' experience. There are lots of questions about the Foundation. Loads of questions have been raised at various stages, and his relationship with the Foundation, which don't even get mentioned. There wasn't even one dissenting voice, really. They were like, oh, look, he absolutely was completely sincere in why he got involved in it in the first place. Towards the end, maybe things changed, but there's no, that rock is left there, and all the stuff that's wriggling underneath the rock are left. The Emma O'Reilly relationship, Emma O'Reilly forgives him. I would have very liked to have seen that. That in itself is pretty interesting, and they didn't go into that at all. So I don't know.
The why she forgave him.
Yeah, and so she forgave him in 2016. So here we are 4 years later. You know, what's the sense around that? And look, again, it's interesting. You know, we had to record Floyd yesterday. He's in the States. So he said his interview actually happened a couple of years back. So again, you know, this all seems to move quite a bit, and it has been a moving story. I guess it's the end of the deal that they cut to kill the story of the lawsuit, and that being the end of things essentially. There are no more Lance Armstrong stories coming out. There are no more investigations into him. He's never going to reveal any more than he's previously revealed. So this was about the rehabilitation of his public image, and you know, he's so close to being completely redeemed in the eyes of enough people for it not to matter.
For sure. I think that's a really good point, and we'll get into this with Floyd as well very shortly indeed. But if you are to believe that we still don't have everything about Lance Armstrong, I think that's a very, very good case, that a very strong case that is the case. I think that you have to just wonder, why is he still holding things back? And it's pretty obvious. We've started to see things trickle back to normality for Lance Armstrong, or trickle back to some level of him being accepted in society again. Like the last couple of slides on the entire series, when it shows Where Are You Now, features Lance Armstrong getting welcomed back into the sports broadcasting world, for example. Not only does he have his own podcast, which is really successful, NBC Sports employ him as a pundit, which is an important thing for Zenovich to have put up at the end, I feel, because you can make your own mind up about this, but the question is always, why is he perhaps still not giving the full truth? This is exactly why, because he is getting paid to give his opinions on cycling once again. He will get more money as time goes by, as people maybe watch this documentary, get blown away by this documentary, and start to believe the Armstrong lie once again.
Yeah, yeah. And if you look at it, loads of sports have. Christophe Basson didn't come up in this, but he was one of the early people who kind of was like, "Oh, this is a bit suspicious," and ended up being bullied by Armstrong. But when he was re-releasing his book a couple of years back, he was wondering why someone like Laurent Jalabert has a role on French television, despite the fact he has a history himself with doping. And the point is that people don't care. When you're watching TV for entertainment, you don't care if that guy is the best broadcaster to enliven the hour of highlights that you have every night for 21 days during the Tour de France, and it's Lance Armstrong. You're like, yeah, I know that guy. What's his name? Yeah, that he was on the Wheaties box, or yeah, he got the yellow arm. Yeah, he cured cancer, whatever. Then people don't care. All they care about is like the 15 seconds that they're tuned in, and is this going to be the best entertainment I can get? So, if you were NBC, wouldn't you hire him if you were an executive there? Like, how do I make the American population vaguely interested in the Tour de France when there are no American riders who are any good? And like, this all seems like a mat. How do I even explain the tactics? We've got like the biggest bully in the history of the sport available to come on and explain to us. Like, it's a win-win-win for everybody, except the sport.
I'm not sure you do employ him, to be honest with you. I think that there is levels of this. It's Lance Armstrong wants us to believe that everything is black and white at this point, because that suits his narrative. Like, if everything is black and white, then everybody who took a cortisone injection is therefore on Lance Armstrong's level, which is so obviously not the case. There is so many grey areas here if we want to consider that doping is rife in cycling, and Lance Armstrong pushed the boat out to its very limit. He is the worst of the worst of the stories that we know. He is the worst doper in the history of the sport. Therefore, he should not be welcomed in before people who, I don't know, the cortisone injections, or even people, to be honest with you, part of US Postal, who were under the thumb, who were doing blood bags, who were doing EPO. For me, they're nowhere near the level of Lance Armstrong. The stuff he said about Emma O'Reilly, the way he psychologically bullied his teammates.
He apologised. He apologised for that, though. That's the thing. Like, at some point, you do actually have to believe in sin and redemption. And we do have a society where you go to prison and you pay your debts to society.
Okay, just on that, Jared, just one question on that. How can you believe in sin and redemption if we are now going to listen to Floyd Landis tell us that there is still so much that Lance is not telling us in terms of the truth? For sin and redemption, you need to come out with the full truth.
That's a key point, right? Just to go back to when you said he was the worst of the dopers, he would maintain he was just the best of the dopers, and that like he's at the front of the field, but the field is the field, and he just happened to win that race anyway. And I think that so my prediction is, and I'm not saying I agree with this, my prediction is that he is going to be a key part of TV coverage, and the main TV coverage of the Tour de France sooner rather than later. And I expect audiences to accept very quickly that this is good for the coverage. Here's the guy wearing the black hat. He's the very impressive Texan coming on with his big opinions and dropping criticism on loads of people because you're going to watch it. I think it's going to be more interesting to watch that broadcast than watching somebody who, a lot of people won't know. Certainly, I think that's how the TV executives are going to do it. And maybe that's the whole point of this, is to get him rehabilitated to a point where he can do that and no one bats an eyelid. And we're probably getting close enough to that point. One of the reviews I read about this was, finally we can stop talking about all this stuff. And I feel that way a good bit. I feel like this might be the last time that I speak about this. This might be the last person I interview ever, or get involved in an interview with about this. That's what I feel, that I've had enough of this now.
It also doesn't help that you've just watched an hour and 50 minutes of Lance in one sitting. Like, that's probably informing your view a little bit on this week. If you talk about gluttony of football in a couple of weeks, it's gluttony of Lance over the last 10 days or thereabouts. So I'm not sure. I could see you getting an enthusiasm for Lance again in 6 months' time. I wouldn't wave the white flag on Lance just yet.
Hold me to my word, will you? Hold me to my word. I have one last thing that I want to say. We're going to go late just for 30 seconds on this. A lot of people were talking about the doping. His son is obviously an offensive lineman at college. And a lot of people were like, would you recommend your son dope? Was essentially the question. I'm paraphrasing there, and he's like, no, not now. Like, maybe when you get to the NFL, like, and there's shock and outrage, I think, a lot of people about that. Like, I think his point about the peloton persists on that. But for me, the worst part about that was not knowing his son's number.
Yeah.
That was the most shocking part. It was like, you're supposed to have a relationship with his kids. You don't know what number he plays in. You got his number wrong in front of everybody. You're there. You don't know the rallying cry of the team that you're giving a talk to. You're completely underprepared for the talk. Like, this is your chance to really help your son with his thing that he's doing, and you get his number wrong, and you don't know. As like the level of self-aggrandizing, being a bit of an a-hole, that's off the charts.
Or is it just a lack of sharpness? I don't know. Like, even when you see him running at the end, like, he doesn't look. I know age is a terrible thing, but like, he doesn't look like the supreme athlete he once was. Even though he's like doing all these triathlons and things like that, he seems like a shell of the Lance Armstrong that was lying his way to Tour de France titles.
Are you body shaming Lance Armstrong there at the end?
Not body shaming whatsoever. I would kill for Lance Armstrong's body, but no, I'd take that back.
Your copy quiz time starts with I would kill for Lance Armstrong's body. I take that back. Right, it is 8:42 this morning here on OTB AM. Irish actor and comedian Ardal O'Hanlon is still to come this morning on the OTB Culture Hall of Fame. First, though, we're delighted to say yesterday afternoon we caught up with Floyd Landis for a feature interview. The convicted doper and 2006 Tour de France winner is one of the most important characters in the Lance Armstrong story. Enjoy.